He thought the problem would be simple. A careless mistake, a rumor, a quick phone call. He dialed the house number with the cold efficiency of someone who managed people by spreadsheet. The maid had been there 7 years. She kept the house running on habit and quiet competence. He told the secretary to patch the call and rehearsed the words he would use. Fire her. No fuss. The phone rang. A steady, kind voice answered. He said what he had to say. You are fired. Effective immediately. Performance issues. Breaches of trust. The tone he used was definitive, practiced. There was a pause. Then a younger voice, surprised and clear. Her daughter. She said she had picked up the phone. He repeated himself, irritated, then heard a sentence that froze him in the garage, hand still on the car door. My mother saved your life, the girl said. He laughed, short and disbelieving. Saved his life. He had security teams, drivers, doctors. The idea that a housekeeper had done anything of the kind seemed impossible. The girl spoke again, calm and urgent. She told him about a night months ago when a storm had nearly turned a routine trip into disaster. She said her mother found something odd while she was doing the laundry, a folded paper tucked behind a stack of bills, a name and a note that did not belong. At first he dismissed it as a superstition of small minds. Then the details arrived, small, awkward, precise like the truth is when it refuses to be polished. The maid had noticed that a driver scheduled to be at the estate was not there. She had checked the log, called a backup number, and when no one answered she had kept calling every 15 minutes until she woke someone who could take a detour and show up. She did not tell anyone because she was afraid. Afraid of being laughed at, of being dismissed. Afraid that speaking up would cost her job or any precarious security she had built for her children. He felt the floor tilt gently beneath the assumptions he had been standing on. He had records and contracts and protocols, but he had not written for the human margin where small observations sometimes carry the weight of lives. He thought of all the ways his systems, expensive technology and layers of delegated worry, could be impeccable and still miss a moment because someone had assumed someone else would notice. When he asked why his name had not come up before, the girl answered plainly that she had urged her mother to speak up, but her mother had been afraid. She had thought it not her place to make a fuss. She had taken on the responsibility in silence because it was better to act than to be sorry later. He asked to speak to the maid. Her voice was soft, not defensive. She said she had done what any person with a conscience would. She had seen something wrong and tried to fix it. She said she had not told anyone because she had not known how. She had thought her work was to keep the house, not to reshape the way the house ran. He found himself offering money without thinking, a reflexive attempt to make discomfort disappear. The daughter refused it. No, she said. Recognition, not charity. Give her a place where her voice matters. Let her have a contract and benefits, and a role that acknowledges responsibility rather than disguises it in invisibility. The offer unsettled him. He had lived in a world where generosity could be a one-time spectacle. He had bought loyalty in bonuses and promotions and expected gratitude on schedule. This was different. This asked for structural change, transparent payroll, official training, stable hours, things that converted gratitude into policy. She had come to the city with 2 suitcases and a determination that felt like a secret muscle. She had worked in other houses before his, always the same. Early mornings, late nights, small kindnesses that never reached report forms. Her daughter grew up watching the way her mother listened, really listened, to the world. The girl described a slow evening. The maid, rearranging linen by the back door, found a crumpled note lodged in the seam of the laundry counter. A name, a time, a line that suggested someone had taken a detour that no one had authorized. She called the guard, then the backup driver, and kept calling until the right person was awake and the route corrected. He remembered his own youth learning to notice a ledger line that felt off. He had moved on to bigger ledgers and forgotten the habit. The maid's attention had been a mirror to that lesson. He understood that gratitude needed structure and that recognition as a one-time act was not enough. The first staff meeting after the call felt unusual. He sat at the end of a long table and listened as people described unnoticed work. He proposed modest changes: a formal reporting channel for safety concerns, predictable schedules, transparent payroll, and basic training for everyone. He insisted staff have seats at meetings and that risks identified by them be logged and reviewed. Change was slow and sometimes awkward. Policies written and then forgotten required muscle to enforce. But over months small fixes accumulated. Drivers logged routes, emergency numbers were posted, schedules matched reality. Staff began to speak up without fear. The daughter became a steady, bright presence. She dropped off cookies, checked in about forms, and spoke plainly when vendors tried to cut corners. The maid received a modest award at a staff dinner and later retired with a pension and the offer to consult when she liked. The daughter graduated, took a job in community outreach, and remained connected in small, steady ways. He began to attend staff meetings not as a performance, but as a practice. At one meeting, he walked across the room and thanked a groundskeeper by name. The surprise on the man's face was an honest thing. Later, when the maid accepted the new contract, she shook his hand briefly and then went to help put out tea for the team, the habitual generosity of someone used to serving but now recognized. He created a small fund to support staff education administered quietly without fanfare and insisted that the human resources team publish an annual report on staff well-being. He asked that managers be evaluated partly on their ability to listen. It was not a grand revolution. It was a series of modest structural changes that would, over time, alter expectations. There was a memory that lodged itself in him like a splinter he had never noticed. Years ago, in a hospital corridor, he had waited for a simple procedure and watched nurses work with the plain competence of people who keep others alive. He had always assumed that competence would be purchased and scheduled. But the maid's call had shown him how often safety sits in the hands of people who are allowed to be small in the official hierarchy. The moment that stayed with him happened on a rainy afternoon. The daughter ran into him at the back gate, soaked and laughing because she had been helping a vendor find the right office. She looked at him with that frankness that young people sometimes possess and said, "You could have done this sooner." He laughed because she was right, and told her he was learning. She said, "Good, then do better." It was not an accusation so much as a challenge that made him grateful. There are stories that fit neatly into press releases, and then there are stories like this one that live in the small ledger of private corrections. He had called to fire a maid and ended up learning to notice. He learned that institutional change often begins with a single voice that refuses to be ignored. He learned, finally, that recognition is a habit to be built, not an award to be distributed. A year later he invited the maid and her daughter to a modest family dinner. It was not a spectacle. The maid arrived with a quiet smile and the daughter with a book under her arm. They sat at the table and spoke about ordinary things: recipes, college classes, a neighbor's cat. His wife asked a question about the daughter's studies and listened. The conversation was simple and ordinary, and in its simplicity it felt like a triumph. When the maid stood to leave, she took his hand for a second and said, "Thank you for listening." The words were small and heavy at the same time. He realized that the real cost of not listening had been his own small moral education. He had called to fire a maid and had been taught what it means to see people. He had learned that respect can be written into contracts and into calendars, and that when it is, the world becomes a slightly less dangerous place for those who keep it running. The call that began as an ending had instead been the start of something steadier. It was not perfect. Old habits returned sometimes. But there was now a structure that reminded him to pause, to ask, to notice, and to respond. He never forgot the sound of the daughter's voice on the phone telling him her mother had saved his life. It became, for him, a small moral compass, a reminder that dignity is often discovered in the most ordinary places.